Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose. Affirmative.
Okay, Greg Anthony here on the Investigative Journal. Glad you're with us. Got a good show for you today. It's a show I've wanted to go back and do a long time ago, and just haven't got around to it. So what I want to do, you're listening to the Investigative Journal, and I'm going to go back to a show I did back in 2006 regarding the Duplessis Orphans. And I want to just let the show speak for itself, and then get some reactions from you Monday on the Investigative Journal. So let's go to that show.
Evening edition of the Investigative Journal. I'm your host, Greg Szymanski, and I'll be here from 7 to 8. And, you know, some stories, you just leave your mouth hanging wide open, and you start wondering, why wasn't this story ever covered sufficiently? And why hasn't justice been served? And this is one of those stories, because after you hear this, there's just no answers for those questions. I mean, this story should have been covered a long time ago, and justice should have been served a long time ago. My guest, Rod Vienneau, has for 15 long years, been trying to get justice for the horrendous crimes committed against his wife. It's been a long, hard battle, a fight that looks like David versus Goliath, since the U.S. and Canadian governments are battling him tooth and nail to keep his story quiet. Rod Vienneau has been trying to get justice, and the reason for the government's barricade at revealing the truth is Vienneau's case opens up a huge can of worms, exposing the government-sanctioned torture and abuse of more than 50,000, maybe even 100,000 children, or more than that, involved in illegal psychiatric government-sanctioned experimentation programs. We all were aware of how, and maybe not all of us, but the CIA-funded programs were used against adults. This was brought out in a recent court case that was held in Canada, and several people there got justice. But now we're talking about a story that involves the illegal experimentation of children. Rod's wife was one of those children. Her name is Clarina, and I have Rod on the phone. How are you this evening, Rod?
Hi, Greg. How are you?
I'm doing fine, and I guess let's just get started.
Okay.
Tell our listeners how this happened to your wife, how you first found out, and what, just an incredible story. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm married 40 years, and in 1992, I never knew about this story until 1992, that when it came out, some of the orphans came public. Some of the orphans went and see a lawyer. And here, the orphans were coming out of everywhere. Hundreds and hundreds with their, looking for justice. And my wife announced to me, and she says, I'm a Duplessis orphan. Also
right.
My sister.
And these children that were illegally experimented upon were nicknamed the Duplessis Orphans. And,
after the Premier of Quebec, Maurice Duplessis, the iron-fisted, Premier.
Okay. Now, this is a story that crosses borders, comes into America. There are children from America brought to Canada. There's been traces of money going through the government of U.S. And Canada.
Yeah, CIA funding.
Yes. And let's just get back to how your wife told you the story of how she was one of these children illegally experimented upon.
Yeah, well, she told me about her, like her mother falling ill back in the 40s, and the family doctor had placed her mother she fell sick at the age of 31, and with tuberculosis, and the doctor placed her in a hospital, sanatorium, and the family doctor, the same one, and the parish priest came over to the house, and he suggested to Mr. Duguay, he says, I would have a nice place He says, for your two daughters, they had five kids, and he says, your two daughters, he says, would be well looked after and get a good education at the Rimouski orphanage, which is on the St. Lawrence River. And my wife was 9 years old, and her sister was 7. And he had no reason to doubt probably the two main people in this little fishing village. And he couldn't read or write, and he just put an X on a. So one day they came along and they came to get the two kids, the girls. They didn't want to go. They were crying for their mom and everything, and they ended up in the orphanage. And 2 years later.
Now, what was where was this orphanage?
Along the St. Lawrence River. It's below Quebec City.
Okay, and the name of that?
Rimouski.
Okay.
The town of Rimouski. It's the Rimouski Orphanage.
Your wife, Clarina, and her sister, Serena, I believe it was?
Clarina.
Clarina's your wife, and your sister's name was what?
Simone.
Simone, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Were placed in the orphanage at the age of 9. Go ahead.
And 2 years later, the nuns, the Sisters of Charity, they just told the girls, a bunch of them, 12 or something, 10 or 12, they said, we're taking you out for a little drive in the bus around the town, because you were good girls. You behaved. So this was not the case. They just put them in the bus, and the girls were. It's like a bit like Germany or Nazi Germany. They were just singing in the bus and this, and they ended up about 300 miles away. They found that they were a long time in the bus, and they ended up at the St. Julians Psychiatric Hospital.
All right. Now, you told me in a long conversation we have that overnight their records were changed, their status was changed. Tell us how that happened. What exactly they did to your wife's records?
Well, to justify her internment, to send her into a site, they had to. She was not crazy, so and neither her sister and neither anybody in the family. But to justify this, they put in her medical record that her mother was mentally ill, and that she had died in another mental institution run by the same order of religious order here.
Now that's a complete fabrication and a lie, correct?
Complete fabrication, and they stated, well, all members of the whole family, immediate family, were all lunatics. They were all mentally ill, and which there's nobody in this family here. There's good.
And they also put that on your wife's, right? That she was mentally ill at the age of what, 11 now?
Yeah, right. They classed her off as a profound mentally insane. Yeah.
And she never underwent any tests or anything like that.
Well, no.
And she was completely sane.
She brought up 6 kids. We were together for 40 years.
I'm talking about back when she was 11.
Yeah.
Yeah. And is this a pattern that you found during your research that other children, their records were also changed?
Well, yes, Greg. All the records that I've seen was all the same pattern. Mentally, they're all mentally profound, or in one either a little bit or very very much so, you know. But they're all falsely labeled kids, and they labeled thousands and thousands and thousands. And this was to experiment with my research and stuff and others that, we found out, well, it was, they were giving chlorpromazine to kids,
Just before, we got a minute here before the break, I just wonder, how many kids are we talking about now? You've been researching this since 92. What kind of numbers we have here that they illegally experimented upon?
Well, I found in 2 places, 100,000 at least. Mm-hmm. This is attached right directly to the Duplessis Orphans.
And I know I was talking to Christine Hahn. She's an investigative journalist that had worked on this story for a couple years, worked with you, other victims. She also mentioned about this grave site of all these children that they found, a mass grave somewhere in, I think, near Quebec, where she claims over 2,000 to 3,000 children.
We found, and this is documented here in the city records, that there's over 2,000. That this is known here, 2,000 at least. That's in this cemetery called the Pigsty Cemetery.
Okay,
this is in Montreal here.
Okay, we'll get back with that and other things on this story in 3 minutes on the other side of our break. Back on the Investigative Journal, and you're listening to the Genesis Communication Radio Network. If you want to go to my website to get my print articles, go to www.arctic, that's ARCTICBEACON.com. That's arcticbeacon.com. You can get my print articles there. Rod, get back to what you were talking about, this pigsty, and I mean a mass grave of 2,000 children. I know there was an effort to try to exhume these bodies. What's happened?
Yeah, in 2004, the Montreal Gazette tried. They did a big story on my wife and also the pigsty cemetery, called because it was next to a pig farm. And, there's at least, we know there's, over 2,000, kids, they're, orphans. It's just a mass, grave site. And, the doctors and psychiatrists that did the, experiments, not one has been held, accountable yet.
Yeah.
If you permit me,
go ahead.
I'm just going to read something here. Here's a Dr. Louis, Roy. Don't worry, this was in the newspaper. So, Dr. Louis Roy from one of the hospitals, he wrote a letter in 1992 to Joseph Sylvester. And he states, he says, Dear Joseph, he says, you were never mentally ill. And he wrote his name, and he says, he was sorry because but he kept them there for 25 years.
Now, this is the doctor writing the child.
Yeah, because
an adult,
Joseph Sylvester could not get him a job. And, and every time he'd go for a job, and on his, they'd say, well, where did you work before? Well, he says, I never worked. I just come out of a mental institution. So he went back to the doctor and he says, can you help me? He says, write a letter or something. And he wrote this letter here in 1992 stating that Joseph Sylvester was never mentally ill. But he was the one that labeled him 25 years earlier.
Right.
And this guy was never held accountable.
Now, why did you find... Now, I know that there's been complicity with the U.S. government and the Canadian government. Why did they take on... Most of the psychiatric institutes were in Canada. Was that to deflect attention because of, at the time, perhaps, they thought they would be caught in America if they were doing this? Well,
I think so, yeah. I think so. This year, past month, I thought of before that I figured since 1922, we have records, like the American Association, Psychiatric Association, and the American Surgeons were implicated right here. They were well established in Quebec, in their hospitals.
And you've uncovered records that American children have crossed the border.
And also, there was, they sold over 200,000 adopted, and there was a lot of, the orphans, there's a lot that crossed over the border that were sold.
Let's get back to your wife now, the particular case of her. Now she's transferred to from the orphanage to the Psychiatric Institute. What type of treatment did she get there? I believe she was there for 11 years?
She was there till from 11 to 17. Okay. She got out of there at 17 and a half years.
Okay, old. You're looking at it 7 years then, right? 7, 8 years.
Yeah.
Tell me tell me what happened to her there. What type of tests? What kind of treatment did she undergo? I mean, this is horrendous. Go ahead.
Yeah, she would it was ice cold baths, plunged in ice cold water, and held her head under. Sexually abused, touched. Put in a straitjacket, put into a cell, kept in a cell, tied to and have to sleep right on a steel bed spring, and with a tied hand and feet with a collar around her neck, and be given Largatil, chlorpromazine every day.
What type of reaction did she have from that?
She'd walk around like a zombie, Mm-hmm. This is the way she felt, and she felt her lips were and her mouth was swollen and like frozen, or
Right.
And she was not alone. I'm not I'm just not fighting. I'm fighting for every one of them, because they all suffered. Every one of these kids suffered tremendously, and they were all underwent different electroshocks and this is horrible, and lobotomies, and it's just terrible that there's nobody yet come out, nobody responsible in any of our governments today and past governments. They just don't want to open this here, and I just keep pushing on all the time.
Right. Are you there?
Yes.
Okay. What I wanted to ask you, you've been trying to get justice now for, going on 13 to 14 years.
Yes.
Tell us, your wife undergoes this treatment. How did she get out of that situation, and how did her sister get out of that situation?
Yeah, well, it's her sister her sister came along after her 2 years in the orphanage when she was 11. Then they transferred her to the, transferred her to the mental institution. So, they didn't keep her a long time. Her sister didn't keep her a long time in the mental institution, in the hospital. They sent her to, this kind of a school, a trade school, where she started, making quilts and stuff, and she planned an escape, and she ran away, and until she got home, she jumped a train, and she got herself home, and once she was there, nobody at the house, because at the time we're talking back in the 40s, and there was no communication where they were staying, and a horse and buggy, that was it, what the
So she literally planned her escape then, correct? She escaped out of this institution. They didn't let her go.
No. She escaped.
So she's luckier than a lot of the children.
Yes, there's a lot of children that went in there and they were just babies, and they got out, like at 21 years old or 25 years old. There's some that we know 39 years old.
Now, what were they using these tests for? I mean, what were the motives behind treating these children this way that you found out so far?
Because you got doctors like Heinz Lehmann that came over from Germany with the chlorpromazine in 1937, and he started working at the Douglas in Montreal, and they started right away giving out this medication here, which was only passed the law passed through the government of Canada allowed this only in 1957. Mm-hmm. So back in the early years, they were giving this out here, like candy to them. They were testing all the time.
Right. And you live, where are you right now? You're still in Canada, right?
Yeah, I stay about 40 miles east of Montreal.
And you're bilingual, you speak French and English.
Uh-huh.
Okay, good. I just wanted to get that straight. One thing, the motive behind this you found has been experimentation on drugs, experimentation on sleep deprivation, any type of mind control programs that you guys were made aware of.
Yeah, well, this is what all these tests were all going on all the time. It was you got Dr. Ewan Cameron that was doing mind control tests. Heinz Lehmann, they were doing it at all these hospitals. All
right, we're going to take a break, and we'll be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal. We're back on the Investigative Journal, and Rod, can you tell me this long fight? I mean, you've never given up. You're trying to get justice. Tell us how that road is going as far as alerting people, alerting the government officials. What kind of response?
Okay, just before, if you permit me,
sure.
I was going to say that at the St. John de Dieu Hospital in Montreal, all the experiments that were going on there, brain surgeries, lobotomies, and whatever, all these orphans here would be sold $50 a body to the universities. And then the university would send them back once they were all cut up, and they were just sending them back. And I don't know. I believe myself. I haven't this part. I haven't got the proof yet, but I believe that I believe they were selling even organs, human organs, because they were just throwing them in. They would put them in boxes, 3-4 bodies in boxes, and just throwing them in the hole, And here, I want to speak to this guy here. He's still working at that hospital. He's psychiatrist, Dr. Denis Lazure, and he always passed himself off as a nice guy wanting to help the orphans. But he states in his book in 2002 that he and other doctors would start off their mornings by pushing the button on the electrical box and put 24 or more orphans in an epileptic state. Mm-hmm. And from there, it was just, working in a factory or whatever, and they'd go on to the insulinic room where they would put a couple of dozen more orphans in a coma. But after a couple of hours, when they come back and they would inject them with something else, and some would wake up and some would not.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you call this murder? I would.
Sounds like it, yes.
Sounds like that.
Now, in your investigation, does anything lead you to believe that this is still going on now?
Yes, because we've been having, we had a few cases just last year again that comes out, and as soon as something comes out of these certain hospitals, the same ones all the time, anything that comes out of this here, it'll come on the news, and right away, bang, it's closed. There's nothing in the newspapers. There's nothing else. They'll just mention it once, and that's it. And it's always
and the problem with how these programs are funded is they go under the radar screen of the governments. They go, the Congress in our country, for example. A lot of the money, I think, that's collected through illegal drug trafficking, things like that, could be funneled into programs like this. And that's why the illegal activity in our government needs to be stopped, because you never know where you're going to get this money from. There's no accountability. Go ahead.
The orphans need justice here, and I just would like to say also, like the Quebec's own ombudsman, March 9, 1999. Mm-hmm. He said there is clear documentation that children were beaten, tortured, sexually abused, sodomized in provincial Roman Catholic Church and the government. So we have enough records and documents to be able to present evidence in each claim. And he said he was asking for a public inquiry in this here. Never got this. He said hundreds of perfectly normal children in orphanages were falsely classified as mental patients in the bid by the Duplessis government acting in complicity with the Catholic Church and the medical establishment to receive federal funds for health institutions. Not only did these people lose their dignity and autonomy, but in many cases they were treated like real psychiatric patients, submitted to electric shock treatments, straitjackets, held in isolation, chained, and even underwent lobotomies.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I know your wife's gone through many of these tortures. Yeah. How is she recovering? Are there still any after effects from this?
Yes, there's after effects, but, I think a lot of the orphans, like ourselves, we're tired, and the government knows that. We had this guy here that died 2 days ago, Sunday. He died on Sunday, poor Leo. He's 79 years old. He fought all his life. He had 4 legal names. He could have used any one of them, and he still hasn't got his right name. He died fighting just to find out what was his real name, And
he was one of these orphans also.
Yeah, one of the orphans. And we sent over 2,000 letters worldwide, everywhere, to every Prime Minister of Canada. We sent some to even to the Human Rights Commission in Geneva, everywhere, and everybody will send in a letter stating an acknowledgement to our letters, this and that, or they'll pass it on to somebody else, and somebody else will pass it on to somebody else, and everybody, and our justice system here is so corrupted. It is unbelievable when it comes to this case here.
Mm-hmm. And the same on this side of the
and the lawyer and the orphans. Not allowed a lawyer in this case.
And, when I was talking to Christine Hahn, the journalist who'd been working on this story, she said, it's next impossible to get this story covered in this country. Nobody wants to touch it here. She finally got it in an alternative magazine.
She is a fantastic journalist, and she's helping unbelievably in this case here. I don't know, maybe if we'd ever get like a Steven Spielberg or somebody in this year and get exhume these bodies, and we need some. One lawyer told me, this is what he told me. He says, Rod, there's got to be a scandal. This is from the outside, hitting on the Quebec government to shame them so much that,
Yeah, it is a question of getting enough public support, because I know when you started to go public with this, they came down pretty hard on you. Tell us.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn. The Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal, and you've been listening to a show I did back in 2006 regarding the Duplessis Orphans. And it's a story that I spent many hours and years researching. And still to this day in 2019, there's been silence in the mainstream media, silence in the American government, silence in the Canadian government, silence in the American Medical Association, the Canadian Medical Association, the Vatican, Catholic Charities, anything. The story, according to them, doesn't exist. And what it talks about is how they used Catholic Charities, the Vatican working together with the CIA, the American government, the Canadian government, to basically take orphans, illegally put on their records through coming from Catholic orphanages that these kids were mentally ill when they weren't. And then they were put into these homes, put into these orphanages, where they were experimented on by Nazi doctors. And that shows you the collusion to bring over these Nazis through the Vatican rat lines on the story we told just last week again, where we found a intelligence officer who testified in a court case in the United States, in the federal court in San Francisco, that the Vatican was complicit in bringing Nazis in the Croatian genocide, complicit in bringing gold and loot over to the Vatican Bank, complicit in taking Nazis and bringing them, giving them new identity, sending them to Argentina, to America, to Canada, etc., and nothing gets done. So when I say there is complicity here and that the Vatican-led New World Order, along with the Jesuits, are deeply involved in what's going on, It's no joke. And this story shows you that it isn't. Again, it falls on the heels of stories that we've done regarding the mission schools in America, run by the Jesuits, that were basically extermination camps. And if you want to talk about extermination camps, Miss Cortez, one of our congresswomen, look at what happened at those places. See if your Jesuit leaders and the people that have put you there in Congress will let you tell that story. Okay? You won't. Because what happened with the mission schools, it was set up to genocide Native American children, both in Canada and America, and we've documented those stories. So, let's get back to this story. It always stuck with me. And I checked with Rod Vienneau, I think it was about 2 months ago. And still, the same stonewalling is going on. So I thought I'd replay it, see if I got any interest, as well as see if anybody out there, send it some to our prominent journalists at Fox and at CNN and see what they have to say. Okay, back to the Duplessis Orphans.
Canadian Mounted Police, they had parked next to my house over a month and a half, and they were just listening in, I think, on the phone calls, and they were parked, the car was right up against the wall of right against the wall of the house, and they did call me, saying other times, saying my letters might have been had anthrax in there. This was right after the 9/11 thing, and all things, intimidations like this here, trying to get us discouraging me to stop my writing, And talking about writing, I wrote a letter, it was on the 1st of September 2005 to the Queen. And I just received an answer I did receive 2 letters from her, but I was wanting one from the Governor General of Canada, and I received it today. Mm-hmm. And she sent our request for justice to the new Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper. So we will be waiting, but I don't know. I don't know if he will dare get into this case here,
About how many active victims right now have you been able to talk with?
We're talking about survivors.
Survivors.
Yeah, about 3,000, I say, everywhere.
And that's people in Canada and America?
Yeah, all over, yeah.
If justice is to be had in this case, we're going to talk about that in a minute. I just want to know how you can get some justice in this case, since we're back on the Investigative Journal. And Rod, I had a chance to talk to Christine Hahn, and your case, we were talking, and this case is the typical David versus Goliath case. But before we get back to you, let me just paraphrase, or let me just say what she said about you. And she said this, quote, "I've dealt with hundreds of people in my career as a journalist, and I've never come across somebody as devoted, well-intentioned, determined, principled, and focused as Rod Vienneau. He applies a clear-minded, relentless work ethic to this benevolent cause. And they say the ultimate compliment to somebody like Rod is that he does his homework, and this he does with great thoroughness, all in an effort to establish justice for a downtrodden group that just about everybody else, including most social activists, choose to overlook." Why do they want to overlook this story, Rod?
Well, criminal acts were done to children. And as a society, Greg, if we leave this go by and stay silent, it will happen again over and over. We cannot. Doctors from the States were coming over here. We have and our doctors were crossing the border also. And the children were crossing the border also. Mm-hmm. And they were doing experiments. But it was done to children. And this got to come out. This has to come out publicly. Exactly. And I think everybody should step in. I've been going on for about 15 years, and I'm all alone. And I'm not going to stop. I know I'm going to push every day. And I'm glad to have somebody like Christine and others, that's helping me in this case here.
Well, it's such a worthwhile cause, and I've said this before. I said, we hear these statements, the truth will set you free, and we want to make the world a better place for our children. But if we can't get justice in this story, those words have absolutely no meaning for me. Because here we have an obvious case where you've collected documentation, and we need to mount an effort on both sides of the border to make sure that this never happens again, and the people that were involved in it are held to some accountability. For your wife's sake, and the sake of thousands of other kids, it's just amazing to me that they would even harass you or have the audacity to harass a person like you, and they do it. And that's what's so upsetting. Let me ask you this: let's talk about these politicians. Anybody come to your aid at all, or are they just staying clear of this?
There's a few not come to our aid. More or less just in a letter. The letter was just a little bit longer, but they seem to want to help. But then, in the end, they'll just pass the letter to they'll just state, well, Mr. Vienneau, what I did, I sent your letter to the certain minister who's in power at the moment. But when this person here was in power 4 years before, could have done something.
Yeah, passing the buck along.
So they're just passing the buck along, right?
Right. And
but nobody yet has to stood up and say, listen, these are criminal acts done to children, and this here is, I realize it's hard for a state or a province, to acknowledge, especially here in Canada or in the United States, We're not just talking about 3 or 4, we're talking about thousands.
Right.
And, but still, I think it would be a better country, to recognize something like this and come out and say, yes, okay, it happened, and we're going to do something.
Yeah, where, in your research, did you focus on where the funding was coming from, anything like that, or has that been too difficult to gather? Have they covered everything up in that regard?
Well, the funding was coming from the states and from the federal government. So either the money was going right to the federal government, and the federal government was passing it on to the provinces,
And you also traced back that some of these doctors had ties to the Nazi Party, things like that?
Oh, yeah. I just don't want to get into that because this is more or less Christine Hahn's story or whatever. And, there's, these poor kids, they've been to hell and back.
Yeah, good point. And I wanted to ask you if at this particular time, you're going to follow up on that letter, suppose that the Queen sent you. This is interesting. And
this is very interesting, yeah.
And to see if it's for real or basically if it's just to pacify you. I'm sure you thought about that.
Oh, yes, I thought of, yeah, for sure.
What about attorneys in this case? What about getting an attorney to file anything? Has that been a difficult road?
Well, every time one of the orphans went to legal aid, because most of them are on welfare, and they're not allowed to get a lawyer.
Okay.
Especially in this case here.
Okay, hold on to that thought. We'll be back with Rod Vienneau. And Rod, you mentioned that, at least in your country, that all the rights for the Duplessis Orphans has been taken away from them by the courts. Tell us how that came down.
1995, the Minister of Justice, he took, right in front of, read it in the National Assembly, he said, he took the criminal aspect out of this case. Unbelievable. Taking a criminal aspect out of a criminal case. And this left civil, and knowing that probably 99% of the orphans were on welfare, and you cannot ask legal welfare if you're asking for compensation. So they had the whole thing locked and shut.
And I think you talked to a lawyer named Daniel Leiter, and what did he have to say?
Daniel Leiter, very nice man. He worked for nothing for over 6 months, and he called me and he told me one night. He says, Rod, the case has been locked, shut for at least over 15 years.
So you're fighting these insurmountable odds right now. You're up against a brick wall, so to speak. What's your next move, Rod? What are you planning to do? I know you're...
Well, I got a few good letters. Well, this one here that came in today from the Governor General's office, and which she sent to the Premier of Canada. So we're going to wait for these answers. I got something else coming, another letter that I sent out 2 weeks ago to the president of the Lawyers Association, stating that this case is criminal and we're allowed to go to court. And there's no limitation of time. And I would just want to say something today. I got a call from Vancouver, British Columbia, that they heard the story on the other day, and they want me on the radio station on Monday.
Oh, in Vancouver.
In Vancouver, yeah.
Fantastic, and that's a fairly decent radio station, huh?
Yeah, it is. And they heard the story the other day.
I put a story on my website also and had you on another broadcast, and I tell you something, that's really good news. I wish you the best.
But in order to get justice, I think we need people.
Exactly.
We need more people talking. We need more people that's got to come out. And they've got to be shamed.
Beside my website where people can go, and I'll give that out, www.arcticbeacon.com, they can read the story about you. Just go to my archives. How can people read more about this story?
I have myself. I've got no website.
Okay.
I should have one, but I can't even afford that. Everything I had for the last 15 years, sir, I just put it in,
Right.
And,
well, listen, there's a start there. You can also probably Google Christine Hahn's name.
But I think this is anybody who wants, this would be, there's the Freedom Magazine.
Right. And there's a story in Freedom Magazine. You can Google Freedom Magazine and get the story.
And there's a couple of stories, heavy stories there that Christine has written.
Right. And, you can also go to my website, get the story, start there.
Yes.
And this will help. The more people we can get to alerted to this problem, the better off we are. And Rod, we're all out of time. I want to thank you again, and we'll stay in touch.
And I want to thank everybody, on your radio station and all the people in the States. And I know everybody, when it comes to children, we've got to protect the children, and I think we cannot leave this case.
Okay, Rod. Thank you. I got to go. Good night.
Okay, so we're back on the Investigative Journal. Got about 9 minutes, and isn't that a horrendous story? I've been checking up on it for the last, year or so, and not much justice has been had, as you can expect. So we're looking at, we did that in 2006. How long are we looking? Boy, a long time. But anyway, go to my website at greganthonysjournal.wordpress.com, and you can get shows going way back regarding the Vatican-led New World Order. And you heard on that old broadcast, I gave out my website, which I started 15 years ago, called Arctic Beacon, and now somebody has kind of taken it over. I somehow did not renew the domain name, and that's a long story, but the company did not have a contact, and it kind of expired, and somebody bought it and put up a fake site, and it's just blocking so that if you go to that, you'll even see article there by Greg, but that's not me. So, and they put up on the top investigative. So it's a site, they just want to hijack that name, and if I wanted to get it back now, I got to pay them an exorbitant amount of money. So anyway, listen, on Monday, I'm going to have on Bert Krantz from the Alamo Ministry. It's a story I worked on for many years, and we're going to update that on Monday. But regarding the Vatican, it's such a story that no one talks about, and every time you start doing it, they'll say it's Catholic bashing, but it really isn't. Now, let's look at this. We did this little story on the Duplessis Orphans with complicity of the Catholic Charities and Vatican, along with the governments of Canada and the United States, CIA, and all of these experimentations going on innocent children. But Franciscan priests and Jesuits were involved in killing, 700,000 to 1 million. They're involved in this Croatian genocide that we talk about. And we talked about it through the lawsuit of Alpern v. Vatican Bank. But there's more of this story in Avro Manhattan's book called The Vatican's Holocaust. And it's been on the banned book list now for 74 years, but can be found on the internet. Everyone should also read The Extreme Oath of the Jesuits. Remember when we talked about the Pope was the Secretary of State who ratified the Concordat? That was Pacelli, with Hitler, and the Pope put Hitler in power, and Hitler put Pavlik in power in Croatia. And he carried out the crusade using Jesuits and Franciscans. The purpose for the terrorist scare was to frighten the British people into withdrawing from this war on terror. The Jesuits control all transportation and rail systems in Madrid, and so the Jesuits also control, this is back then, the intelligence agency in Spain, and killed over 200 people that brought Spain out of this crusade. This has to be an American standalone war, right? No. So when we start talking about this connection, it's just amazing. The Vatican rat lines, remember we talked about that, moved guilty Nazis to South America to avoid justice. And I've talked about it so many times. And you can get these all on my website at greganthonysjournal.wordpress.com. And I've transferred most everything over there from Arctic Beacon. Okay, so last week we did a story about Alpern v. Vatican Bank and the Croatian genocide, and we referenced an article by Josim Melem pointing a finger at the Vatican, showing how senior church officials were involved in smuggling and hiding Nazi war criminals so they would not be arrested and tried for war crimes. This covert action by the Vatican during World War II was recently verified, like I said, in a deposition taken, I believe it was in 2008 or 9, by a former Army intelligence officer, William Gowan, had no reason to lie, who pinned Giovanni Battista Montini, who later became Pope Paul VI, to property theft of Jewish, Serb, Russian, Ukrainian, Roma, and victims of World War II. And my question to everybody, if there's substantial information here that this occurred, why isn't it ever talked about? Because the people in power are covering up and work with this criminal organization in Rome. And that's why you never hear anything about it. And that's why you hear glowing stories about the Pope and about the Vatican, and everyone never brings up what really is going on behind the scenes. Now, Gowan's testimony also revealed that after the war, Montini, who during the war served as the Vatican's Deputy Secretary of State under the Pope, helped hide and launder property that had been stolen from, among others, Jews, and was involved in the sheltering and smuggling of Croatian war criminals, such as the leader of the Ustashi movement, Ante Pavelic. Now, Gowan's testimony, shocking testimony, it was part of this lawsuit that I covered many years, filed in 1999 on behalf of the Croatian victims at a court in San Francisco against the Vatican Bank, otherwise known as the Institute for Religious Works, and against the Franciscan Order, the Croatian Liberation Movement, the Ustashi, the National Bank of Switzerland, and others. The suit was filed by Jewish, Ukrainian, Serb, and Roma survivors, as well as relatives of victims and various organizations that together represent over 300,000 World War II victims. This story, folks, never gets talked about. The plaintiffs have demanded accounting and restitution from the Vatican Bank, as well as trying to uncover their role in the mass extermination of hundreds of thousands of people. Now, this case was dropped after 10 years, and the court in San Francisco, the federal court, who's in the pocket of the same people we talk about, basically said there was no standing to sue because the Vatican Bank didn't do business in America. Go figure. I've had Jonathan Levy, the attorney, many times on my show, and he explained the irregularities in the Vatican Bank and their connection to the Nazi war criminals. And he called it, as it should be, the biggest money laundering operation in the world, one of the biggest, and still goes on to this date. And really, there's very little oversight at all. So, if you're a criminal and you want to put your money somewhere, go talk to the Pope. He only takes 10 to 15%. Other researchers have used this information that we talked about as clear-cut evidence of Vatican involvement in the New World Order and its onslaught on the freedoms in America that are going on to this day. And I think if you look hard enough, you'll see Ocasio-Cortez and all these new congressmen coming in there spewing out these democratic socialist ideas connected to this very same organization. Otherwise, why are they getting so much press? And what you're hearing, the socialist movement by these younger Congress people. And that's what America is in store for in the future. Just get used to it. They're getting you used to what's going to happen in the future. Now, I talked about this story to the cows came home about the Croatian genocide. And after that, Levy filed a case in Europe, as he is a lawyer also in England. And so he's still pushing to see if he can get justice for these people. And in the country that supposedly has the freest judicial system in the world, ours, he doesn't seem to have a prayer here. Not with these judges in the pocket of the Vatican-led New World Order. Okay, see you Monday. Have a good weekend on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.